Morning, September 15th, 1944. Corporal Lewis Kenneth Bausell charged forward across the coral sand of Peleliu Island, his automatic rifle blazing as enemy fire tore through the air around him. At just 20 years old, this Marine from Pulaski, Virginia, had already survived Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and Cape Gloucester. Now, leading his squad from Company C, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, he was first to reach the concrete pillbox that dominated this vital beach sector. The structure's dark aperture erupted with machine gun fire. Without hesitation, Bausell pressed his weapon against the opening and unleashed a devastating burst into the fortification's interior. Behind him, his fellow Marines scrambled forward through a hellscape of smoke, explosions, and the screams of wounded men. The Japanese had transformed this 6-mile coral island into a fortress of death, and the 1st Marine Division was paying in blood for every yard gained. But Bausell's attention remained fixed on that pillbox, his finger steady on the trigger as he poured fire into the enemy position. His men were counting on him. The journey to this moment had begun nearly 3 years earlier, on December 15th, 1941, just 8 days after Pearl Harbor. 17-year-old Lewis Bausell had walked into a Marine Corps recruiting station in Washington, D.C., where he'd moved with his family from Virginia when he was 7. His father had to sign the enlistment papers, giving permission for his son to join. The young bookbinder from Ransdell Incorporated left behind the safety of his workplace and the familiar streets of the nation's capital for the brutal training regimen of Parris Island, South Carolina. The transformation from civilian to Marine was swift and unforgiving. By March 1942, he'd earned promotion to private first class. 3 months later, in Wellington, New Zealand, as his unit prepared for combat, he pinned on corporal chevrons. On May 20th, 1942, the 5th Marines sailed into the vast Pacific, carrying thousands of young men toward an uncertain fate. Among them was Lewis Bausell, who could never have imagined the sacrifice that awaited him on a coral island he'd never heard of. August 7th, 1942, the Solomon Islands. Bausell's first taste of combat came in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal, where the 1st Marine Division launched America's first major offensive against Japan. For 4 brutal months, he fought through dense vegetation and oppressive heat, defending Henderson Field's vital airstrip and battling along the Matanikau River. Disease was as deadly as enemy bullets. Malaria, dysentery, and tropical infections ravaged the Marines. When his regiment finally withdrew in November, they were gaunt shadows of the men who'd landed, but there was no going home. After rest and rehabilitation in Melbourne, Australia, the 5th Marines moved to New Guinea in spring 1943, then launched the Cape Gloucester assault on New Britain Island 3 days after Christmas. The jungle fighting was savage, but the Marines prevailed. With each campaign, Corporal Bausell gained experience, confidence, and the respect of his men. 1 month before Peleliu, his superiors examined him and found him qualified for promotion to sergeant. He would never wear those stripes. The coral island ahead would demand a different kind of sacrifice. Following Cape Gloucester, the exhausted 1st Marine Division returned to the Solomon Islands, specifically to Pavuvu Island in the Russell Island chain. It should have been paradise, a tropical island northwest of Guadalcanal with swaying palms and white beaches. Instead, it was a sodden, rat-infested hellhole where coconut crabs the size of small dogs terrorized the camps and endless rain turned everything to mud. For months, the Marines trained, cleaned equipment, and tried to forget the horrors they'd witnessed. In August 1944, Bob Hope's USO show arrived, bringing brief laughter and a reminder of the world they were fighting to preserve. But the calendar pages turned relentlessly toward September. Intelligence briefings revealed their next target, Peleliu, a small coral island in the Palau group, 800 miles southeast of Manila. The island held a strategic airfield that could threaten General Douglas MacArthur's planned invasion of the Philippines. Major General William Rupertus, commanding the 1st Marine Division, made a bold prediction. The island would be secured in 4 days, maybe 5 at most. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Peleliu would become the deadliest amphibious assault in Marine Corps history. The Japanese commander on Peleliu, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, had learned from previous defeats. Unlike earlier island battles where Japanese forces hurled themselves in suicidal banzai charges, Nakagawa adopted a strategy of defense in depth. His nearly 7,000-man garrison spent months converting Peleliu's natural limestone ridges and coral formations into an impregnable fortress. They carved more than 500 caves and tunnels into the Umabragol highlands, which the Marines would soon call Bloody Nose Ridge. These interconnected positions featured multiple entrances and exits, ventilation systems, and reinforced concrete blast doors. Artillery pieces and machine guns were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire across the landing beaches. The Japanese pre-registered every likely American approach with their mortars and artillery. 24 75mm artillery pieces, a dozen light tanks, and countless heavy machine guns and mortars waited in camouflaged positions. The Americans expected typical Japanese defenses. What they found was something far more deadly, a preview of the ferocious resistance they would face at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. September 12, 1944. An American armada of 868 ships assembled off Peleliu, with 129 vessels designated for the assault element. For 3 days, battleships Pennsylvania, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Idaho, supported by heavy and light cruisers, pounded the island. The thunder of naval gunfire was so intense that men had to shout to be heard even standing next to each other. Carrier-based aircraft dropped tons of bombs and napalm. The Navy expended thousands of shells in what they believed was overwhelming firepower. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf was so confident he'd destroyed all targets that he ended the bombardment a day early and sent most support ships toward the Philippines. It was a fatal error. The Japanese had survived the onslaught deep in their reinforced caves and tunnels. On September 14th, the Marines aboard the troop ships received their final briefing. That night, Reveille would sound at 100 hours. They would be served steak and eggs, a meal traditionally reserved for men about to face combat. Few slept well. In the darkness, 17,000 Marines of the 1st Division prepared their weapons, wrote last letters home, and waited for dawn. 0132 hours, September 15th, 1944. Throughout the fleet, men stirred in their bunks, roused by Reveille's call. By 0200, mess halls were serving breakfast. Corporal Lewis Bausell sat among his squad mates, trying to force down steak and eggs while his stomach churned with pre-combat nerves. Around him, veteran Marines checked equipment with practiced efficiency, while newer replacements betrayed their fear with shaking hands and forced jokes. At 0630, the naval bombardment resumed, a final fury before the landing. At 0730, the 1st Marines climbed down cargo nets into their landing craft, a treacherous descent with 60 pounds of combat equipment. Bausell carried his automatic rifle, extra ammunition, grenades, and a canteen filled with water that would prove desperately inadequate for what lay ahead. Armored amphibious tractors, LVTS, would carry them across the reef and onto the beaches. The 5th Marines would land on Orange Beaches 1 and 2 in the center of the assault zone, with the 1st Marines to their right on White Beach and the 7th Marines to their left on Orange Beach 3. H hour was set for 0830. At 0832, just 2 minutes late, the first wave hit the beach. The LVTs churned through the water toward shore, their engines roaring as they crossed the reef line 700 feet from the beaches. Inside the cramped vehicles, Marines hunched behind thin armor plate, weapons ready. Then the Japanese opened fire. The steel doors protecting their fortified positions swung open, and the island erupted with fury. Artillery, mortars, 47mm guns, and 20mm cannons tore into the approaching waves. Within 90 minutes, 60 LVTS and DUKWS were destroyed, their burning hulks scattered across the reef and beaches. Marines leaped from damaged vehicles into chest-deep water, struggling toward shore through a storm of fire. The coral sand erupted in geysers as shells impacted. Machine gun bullets kicked up spray and cut men down in the surf. The carefully planned assault devolved into chaos. Communications were disrupted. The 1st Marines commander, Colonel Lewis Chesty Puller, had his LVT hit by a dud artillery round. His communications section was destroyed by a direct hit from a 47mm gun. Despite the carnage, the Marines pressed forward. By 0930, all 5 initial landing battalions were ashore, but they were pinned down by murderous fire. Corporal Bausell's squad came ashore amid the maelstrom. The 5th Marines landed on the left flank of the division front, tasked with pushing inland and capturing the airfield. But first, they had to survive the beach. Bodies of dead and wounded Marines littered the coral sand. Destroyed vehicles burned, sending thick black smoke into the already hazy air. The noise was overwhelming. The crack of rifles, the chatter of machine guns, the crump of mortars, and the screams of wounded men calling for corpsmen. The heat was already oppressive. Temperatures would climb past 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity made every breath feel like drowning. Within the first hour, the assault waves fought their way 100 yards inland to the top of a small coral ridge, one of dozens that honeycombed the island. This terrain was nothing like the intelligence photos suggested. Instead of low, rolling hills, they found razor-sharp coral formations, steep ravines, and countless cave openings from which Japanese fire erupted. Bausell's squad was assigned to clear these caves, a deadly task that required men to expose themselves while neutralizing hidden enemy soldiers who fought with fanatical determination. The cave-clearing operations began immediately. Japanese defenders used the interconnected tunnel systems to devastating effect, appearing suddenly to fire, then vanishing before Marines could respond. Each cave had to be approached carefully. Bausell's squad employed tactics learned through bitter experience in previous campaigns. They used flamethrowers to flush out defenders, burning precious fuel to fill cave openings with searing heat and smoke that left enemy soldiers with a terrible choice: remain and suffocate, or burn, or exit and face American rifles. The psychological toll was enormous. These were close-quarters battles where men saw their enemies' faces, heard their screams, and smelled burning flesh. On this particular coral ridge, Bausell's squad approached a cave opening. The flamethrower operator sent a burst of liquid fire into the darkness. Smoke and flames poured from the entrance. Then the first Japanese soldier emerged. He clutched a hand grenade and detonated it in a suicide attack, hoping to take Americans with him. The blast caused minor casualties but failed to stop the advancing Marines. A second enemy soldier rushed out and was cut down by rifle fire. But the Japanese were not finished. Intelligence and combat experience had taught them that Americans would press forward after initial resistance. They waited, concealed in defensive positions that overlapped and supported each other. As Bausell's squad advanced beyond the cave they'd just cleared, they encountered a concrete pillbox that dominated this section of the beach. The fortification's thick walls could withstand anything short of a direct hit from naval gunfire. Its firing aperture commanded a vital sector, preventing other Marines from advancing. Machine gun fire from the position had already killed or wounded dozens of Americans. The pillbox had to be neutralized. Standard procedure called for suppressing fire while assault teams maneuvered to flanking positions. But time was critical. Every minute the pillbox remained operational cost American lives. Corporal Bausell made an instant decision that would define his legacy. He would lead from the front. Placing himself at the head of his squad, he charged directly toward the enemy fortification. His automatic rifle was up and firing before the Japanese could react. Bullets tore through the humid air around him as he sprinted across open ground that offered no cover. Bausell reached the pillbox first, arriving at the concrete structure while enemy bullets still searched for him. Without pausing, he pressed his automatic rifle against the firing aperture and squeezed the trigger. The weapon roared, sending round after round into the pillbox's dark interior. The effect was devastating. The confined space amplified each impact. Japanese soldiers inside were caught in a killing zone with nowhere to hide. Behind Bausell, his squad members closed the distance, adding their fire to his. The Marine corporal's aggressive action had broken the tactical stalemate. The pillbox could no longer direct effective fire at the beach. Other Marines could now advance. But the battle for this position wasn't over. The Japanese defenders, though stunned and bloodied, were far from finished. They had one weapon remaining that could turn the tide: hand grenades. In the chaos of combat, with smoke and dust obscuring visibility, a Japanese soldier inside the fortification pulled the pin on a grenade and hurled it toward the Marines clustered around the aperture. The explosive device arced through the air and landed among Bausell and his men. Time seemed to slow. In war, such moments demand instant decisions that separate heroes from casualties. Corporal Lewis Kenneth Bausell saw the grenade land among his squad. His mind processed the situation in a fraction of a second. The fuse was burning. In seconds, perhaps 5, perhaps less, the grenade would explode. The blast radius would kill or severely wound everyone nearby. These were his men. Some were veterans who'd fought beside him through multiple campaigns. Others were younger replacements experiencing their first combat. All of them had families waiting at home: mothers, fathers, wives, sweethearts, children. In that frozen instant, Bausell understood what he had to do. There was no time for grenades to be thrown clear, no time for everyone to find cover. Only one action could save his squad. Without hesitation, without regard for his own survival, Lewis Bausell threw himself on the grenade. His body covered the deadly device completely. He pressed himself against the coral ground, making himself a human shield. The men around him had no time to react, no opportunity to pull him away or throw themselves on the grenade instead. They could only watch in horror as their squad leader sacrificed himself. The grenade detonated beneath Bausell's torso with a muffled blast. The explosion's force lifted Bausell's body and slammed it back to the ground. Shrapnel that would have torn through multiple Marines was instead absorbed by his flesh and organs. The blast wave that would have ruptured lungs and caused traumatic injuries was contained by his sacrifice. The men surrounding him survived. Some suffered minor wounds from fragments that escaped around Bausell's body, but none received fatal injuries. The corporal himself was catastrophically wounded. The grenade's detonation at point-blank range caused massive internal trauma. Yet somehow, impossibly, Lewis Bausell remained conscious. In testimony that speaks to his extraordinary constitution and will, he continued giving orders to his men. With his dying breath, he directed them forward to complete the assault on the pillbox. His squad, galvanized by their leader's sacrifice and desperate to make his death meaningful, poured fire into the fortification. The remaining Japanese defenders were overwhelmed. The pillbox fell silent. The vital beach sector was secured. Other Marines could now advance inland. Corporal Bausell's ultimate act of valor had achieved its objective. Navy corpsmen rushed forward with a stretcher, working frantically to stabilize his injuries. The corpsman's task was nearly impossible. Grenade wounds, especially when absorbed at such close range, cause devastating trauma. Internal organs are shredded by shrapnel. Blood loss is rapid and massive. Battlefield medicine in 1944, though improved from earlier wars, could only do so much under combat conditions. But the corpsmen tried. They applied tourniquets, administered morphine for the unimaginable pain, and worked to stop the bleeding. A stretcher team carried Bausell back across the beach through the ongoing battle to a waiting evacuation boat. The LVT carried him across the reef to the attack transport USS DuPage, which had been converted to serve as a hospital ship offshore. By this time, the DuPage was receiving hundreds of casualties from the brutal first day of fighting. Approximately 210 Marines had been killed and 900 wounded on September 15th alone. 4 hospital ships off Peleliu would receive 2,343 wounded Americans in the battle's opening days. Aboard the DuPage, surgeons worked desperately to save Bausell's life. They operated in cramped spaces with limited resources while the ship rocked in the Pacific swells. Despite their efforts, the wounds were too severe. For 3 days, Lewis Kenneth Bausell clung to life. The young man who'd enlisted at 17, who'd survived the hell of Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, who'd charged enemy pillboxes without hesitation, fought his final battle in a hospital ship bunk. Morphine dulled the worst pain, but his injuries were beyond the medical capability of the time. On September 18, 1944, 3 days after throwing himself on that grenade, Corporal Bausell died. He was 20 years old. Following naval tradition for casualties who died aboard ship, his body was committed to the sea. Wrapped in canvas and weighted, Lewis Bausell disappeared beneath the Pacific waves, forever part of the ocean he'd crossed to fight for his country. Back on Peleliu, the battle raged on. The island that was supposed to fall in 4 days would not be secured for 74 days. The Marines would fight some of the most savage combat of the Pacific War in the coral ridges and cave systems. The casualty rate would exceed 40%, the highest of any amphibious assault in American military history. Of the 28,000 Marines and Army soldiers who fought on Peleliu, 1,794 would die and 8,000 would be wounded. News of Corporal Bausell's heroism and death traveled through military channels. His squad mates, the men whose lives he'd saved, provided sworn statements detailing his actions. Their testimony formed the basis for a posthumous Medal of Honor recommendation. The citation wound its way through the chain of command, from company to battalion to regiment to division to Marine Corps headquarters to the Navy Department. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, serving as Commander-in-Chief, approved the award in early 1945, just weeks before his own death in April. The Medal of Honor is the nation's highest military decoration, awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Since its creation during the Civil War, only 3,500 have been awarded. The standards are extraordinarily high. The action must involve personal bravery or self-sacrifice so conspicuous as to clearly distinguish the individual above his comrades. Lewis Bausell's sacrifice on that coral ridge met every criterion. He had given his life to save others, embodying the highest ideals of military service and human courage. Back in Washington, D.C., Bausell's parents received the devastating telegram. Lawrence and Margaret Bausell had already endured weeks of agonizing uncertainty after receiving notification that their son was wounded. Now they learned he was dead. The young man who'd left their Washington home in December 1941 would never return. But their grief was accompanied by pride when they learned their son would receive the Medal of Honor. On June 11, 1945, 9 months after Lewis's death, his parents arrived at the Navy Department Auditorium in Washington, D.C. Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, presided over the ceremony. General Alexander A. Vandergrift, Commandant of the Marine Corps, stood in attendance. Bausell's sisters and one sister-in-law were also present to honor his memory. Secretary Forrestal read the citation aloud, his voice carrying through the packed auditorium. He described how Corporal Bausell had valiantly placed himself at the head of his squad and immediately started firing his automatic into the aperture before throwing himself on the grenade. The citation concluded, "His unwavering loyalty and inspiring courage reflect the highest credit upon Corporal Bausell and the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country." Margaret Bausell accepted the Medal of Honor on behalf of her fallen son. The decoration, a 5-pointed star hanging from a light blue ribbon, represented not just Lewis's individual sacrifice, but also the gratitude of the nation he'd died defending. Along with the Medal of Honor, Corporal Bausell was posthumously awarded the Purple Heart for wounds received in action. The Presidential Unit Citation awarded to his unit, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 4 bronze stars representing his campaigns at Guadalcanal, New Guinea, Cape Gloucester, and Peleliu, and the World War II Victory Medal. Lewis K. Bausell would be officially listed on the American Battle Monuments Commission's walls of the missing at Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines, a memorial to those who have no known grave. But Bausell's story didn't end with his death or even with his Medal of Honor. On November 19, 1945, just over a year after Lewis died, a new Gearing-class destroyer was launched at Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine. Margaret Bausell stood on the platform, champagne bottle in hand, and christened USS Bausell. The destroyer carried her son's name proudly for 41 years of service. USS Bausell served with distinction during the Korean War, earning 3 battle stars for her service from 1951 to 1953. She patrolled hostile waters, conducted shore bombardments, and screened carrier task forces. During the Vietnam War, the ship earned 9 battle stars for extensive operations off the coast of Vietnam. The destroyer participated in countless missions, her crew of sailors serving aboard a vessel named for a Marine who'd embodied the warrior ethos. USS Bausell was finally decommissioned on May 30, 1978, after 3 decades of service. 9 years later, on July 17, 1987, she was sunk as a target during missile tests, a warrior's end for a warrior's ship. On May 23, 2022, in Pulaski County, Virginia, the entrance road to Pulaski County Middle School was officially dedicated as Corporal Lewis K Medal of Honor Way. The ceremony ensured that new generations would learn about the local hero who'd given everything for his country and his brothers in arms. Corporal Lewis K Bausell remains the only enlisted Marine from Washington, D.C. to receive the Medal of Honor for actions during World War II. His sacrifice on Peleliu stands as a testament to courage, leadership, and the ultimate meaning of the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful.